That's him and James and Johnny. Did we lose our AV expert?
Maybe it's just the volume button.
The volume button. Is it on?
But we're just playing second sheet. Can you put on the YouTube version yet?
I cannot.
It's the Ibis Empire State Building. So at this point, I'm gonna pretty much open it up to invite anyone that wishes to say anything. This would be the time to do it. I suppose if there's any family members that have anything to say, I'll offer it to them first. Anybody got a story to tell from the general public?
I'll start. I don't mind.
You can have-
Go ahead.
The concern is you don't have enough time. There are so many stories.
I know.
There's so many.
You know, the thing about your dad was that you either agreed completely with him, agreed partially with him, disagreed partially, or disagreed totally with him. And there was no middle ground there. I mean, there was nothing was in the middle. I mean, he was not a neutral person at all. And I would say over the years, there was only one time I really terribly disagreed with him. Something he did, not what he said. I'm not going to tell you about it, it's not important. But I think, you know, his, the whole idea was that he was, you know, there was no middle ground with David at all. Okay.
That's true.
Yes, ma'am.
I have one. We stood on the bridge for a long time protesting the war in Iraq. And I didn't know him very well at all before. I didn't know him. But we got to be very good friends, even though we stood on the opposite sides of the bridge. And I remember one day coming up to stand parked near the library and was going to cross the bridge to my side. And within about, I said hello to David, he said hello, and within 3 or 4 turns of conversation, we were talking about how to do ourselves in with a plastic bag.
I got a story.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Janet. I'm David Royce's neighbor for about 29 years or so. So I really know David just from seeing him through on the other side of my backyard. And in the early 80s, mid-80s, he came to my house and asked me for a check for $150 or something for a lawyer. And I said, what for? And he said, to help fight the crematorium they're going to build at the cemetery. And I remember as a young woman at the time, and $150 was a lot of money to me. But I said, okay, here. So I gave him the money, and I did find out later that he actually was instrumental, along with other people in town, to keep that corporation called Lowen or something from building a crematorium, which would have been actually not far from my house. Would have been a horrific thing. So I always applauded him for taking the initiative to do something. I didn't do anything, and he was that kind of a person who would actually do it. So I always applauded him for that.
My understanding of the cemetery, then, I may not be getting the facts all correct, is that a cemetery corporation tried to take over by essentially purchasing, controlling shares where they could vote anything that they wanted through. And so my father, in order to fight them, had to do a lot of politicking and raise support among the sort of everyday shareholders in order to fight the corporation. And that was one of the battles he won.
Yes, good. I was very pleased.
Let me tell you a little more about that story. He had the... My name is Ron. Most of you know me. I'm a big troublemaker. David had to go to every family that had any interest in that cemetery. Their names were on the stones. And he had to do a research thing, and he had to petition with all those names and a petition from all those families to keep it as he did. And it's our cemetery, certainly, and the people that go there. I love David. David was a good friend. And I have to tell you this story, because I've never told this one, but today's the day to not lie too much. And the time he got arrested in town hall making a public statement, that was a setup. David told me what he was going to do, and the picture's there. And he went down to the front, and we have this magnificent building as a result of all of that. But we hauled him off too. And the charge was never pursued in court, and I'm not going to tell you why. That's my secret. But he was a wonderful friend, and this community is going to miss him. My own personal story has to do with the handicap ramp. My father was a stroke victim, and he says, look, he says, it's fine that Royce guy's got this idea to convert town hall from a school, but he says there's no ramp. So I went to your dad and I said, look, Dave, it's a wonderful idea, but we need handicap access and we need an elevator. Well, don't you know, he went back to all of these plans he had generated and redrew it with the ramp and the elevator in this building. And if you didn't know Ned Dimes, you don't know what a trial it was getting the money to do that. But that's the story, and there's a million more, and I'm sure other people can share them with you. He was a wonderful person. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
I'm Marty Howell, and we moved to Westport in 1965. got very involved in town very shortly afterwards. And remember your father often at the old town hall carting one of you along with him because he was the person that was there taking care of you. And of course, as Ron said, we all owe him thanks for this building, which would not have happened without him. And which has given us great joy and some of us great pain over the years. What I wanted to say, though, is that I always enjoyed David. I always enjoyed what he had to say. I may not have agreed with him, but I listened to every word because he was a very good public speaker. He may not have written letters to the editor that I agreed with, but I always read them because his name was on them, and he was a very good writer. And I was delighted a few years ago to read a letter from him in the paper expressing great joy that Barack Obama had been elected president of the United States, and I was thrilled to see that. So I called and left a message for him, he wasn't home, and said, thank you so much, I'm so glad to see we're on the same side, and I'd love to have lunch sometime. And he called me back, he'd been away, and said, let's do that. And of course, that was how long ago, 6 years. And I never quite got around to calling, and David never quite got around to calling. So I just wanted to say once again, I'm reminded, as we all should be, if there's someone you care about, and someone you remember with pleasure, see them and call them and have lunch, because I feel very badly about that.
Thank you.
Excellent.
You said a lot of what I wanted to say. I am Joanne Lehman, and I date back to when David was crawling around this empty building. And I don't even remember how we met, but he was telling me that he was doing this. And I don't think you're supposed to be doing that, but I didn't tell. And we got this great town hall as a result. But I just want to say how much I always enjoyed him. And I remember the children, although they look a little different now. And he was always interesting, and I had great arguments with him. And I'll miss him. Yeah, he was just, Westport is not going to be entertained as well forever.
Or served.
Or served.
It's on.
Just so you wouldn't have to look at me in the back. My name is David Neff. I am also a neighbor of David Royce and his family. But in Westport, a town of 25,000 people, we are all essentially neighbors. And we're all neighbors of David Royce. And although you wouldn't know it if you try and park near the post office. And I have known David for at least 30 years. As much as I could get to know David, because we had major disagreements all the time. To the point where we had to avoid looking at each other because it would start a problem. And there was no way to deal with David or me, because I can't say that in trying to either establish a relationship or become friends, because we did start out that way, that it's only one person's fault. So it's probably as much my fault as it was his for not really trying to reach each other. Although I can say he reached me a number of times to the point where I got really, really angry. And I have my own resources. I have my own way of dealing with these situations and getting back at people. But it was endless with David. So I really did not want to have too much to do with him. But we were close enough that we had to pass glances. We had to pass cars. We had to